I still remember the message that shattered me. It wasn't even sent directly to me. It was in the family group chat, the one I had been silently removed from months ago. My cousin's wedding announcement glowed on my phone screen. An elegant invitation photo, smiling faces, pastel flowers, and a long list of bridesmaids and groomsmen. I scanned the names twice, then a third time. My name wasn't there. I kept staring at it, my stomach twisting, waiting for the realization to fade, for the mistake to fix itself. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by half-folded laundry and quiet. The hum of the fridge was the only sound. For a long time, I told myself maybe they hadn't finalized the list yet. Maybe Amanda, my older sister, had forgotten to mention me. But the truth pressed against my chest like a stone. Ever since the argument about Dad's inheritance, I'd become the family's invisible stain. The one who spoke too much truth in a house that preferred silence. The argument had started as a misunderstanding and ended as a fracture that never healed. When Dad passed away, his will was straightforward. Everything was split equally between us. But Amanda had wanted more. She called it compensation for the years she'd cared for him. I had disagreed, saying love didn't demand payment. My words, meant to defend fairness, had been twisted into accusations. The family sided with her, not because she was right, but because she cried louder. And I, who refused to perform grief the way they approved of, became the villain. When I finally called Amanda about the wedding, her voice was sharp, rehearsed, too steady for someone surprised to hear from me. "Lucy, it's better if you don't come," she said flatly. "It'll be less awkward for everyone." I sat there, gripping the phone until my knuckles turned white. Less awkward for everyone. Everyone except me, the one being erased. The one who'd loved her sister enough to still think about what to wear to her cousin's wedding. My throat tightened, but no tears came. Instead, a strange calmness replaced the hurt, as if the pain had burned so bright it turned cold. When the call ended, I looked at my reflection in the mirror above my dresser. My eyes were red, but not from crying, from exhaustion. "You'll show up anyway," I whispered. "But not as they expect." That was the seed of revenge, not the cruel kind, but the poetic kind. The kind that doesn't destroy but redefines. The kind that whispers, "You tried to erase me, but I'll rewrite the story myself." The next morning, I woke early, opened my laptop, and began searching for dresses. I didn't want something loud or glittery. I wanted elegance. Something that would speak before I did. After hours of scrolling, I found it. A dark sapphire gown, simple but sculpted. The kind of dress that glimmered subtly under light, that made people pause without understanding why. I added it to my cart, my heart thudding with something like defiance. I worked overtime at the cafe that week, serving coffee and smiling even when exhaustion settled in my bones. My coworkers didn't know why I suddenly volunteered for every closing shift. They didn't need to. Every tip, every small wage was going into that dress. Into reclaiming something I'd lost, not belonging, but dignity. One evening, as I dragged my trash to the bins outside, I ran into Daniel, my neighbor from 2 floors up. He was tall, soft-spoken, the kind of person who noticed things others didn't. We'd spoken before, small conversations in the elevator, brief hellos. That night he noticed my red eyes. "You okay?" he asked, his tone careful. For a second I almost lied. Then the words slipped out. "My family doesn't want me at a wedding." He nodded slowly, not asking why. Just letting the silence hold what didn't need to be explained. Then he said something simple but disarming. "You don't have to go alone to prove anything. But if you're going to walk in there, I'll walk beside you." I blinked at him, startled. "You'd come to a wedding full of strangers?" He smiled faintly. "I've been to worse places." That made me laugh for the first time in weeks. His tone wasn't pitying. It was matter of fact, almost protective. I didn't know it then, but that moment marked the beginning of something I hadn't felt in a long time. The quiet power of being seen. Over the next few days, we talked more. He learned about the family feud, about Amanda's cutting words, about how being invisible could sometimes feel louder than any insult. He never interrupted, never told me to move on. He simply listened, occasionally offering small pieces of wisdom disguised as casual remarks. "You know," he said once as we sat on the building's rooftop, "people like that build castles out of control. When you stop reacting, the castle collapses on its own." It stuck with me. Maybe revenge wasn't about fighting back. It was about existing gracefully where they expected you to vanish. When the package finally arrived, I opened it carefully. The dress shimmered in the afternoon light, smooth as water. For a moment, I imagined Amanda's face when she saw me walk in. Not bitter or vengeful, but composed, radiant, undeniable. The week before the wedding, I booked a salon appointment. Nothing extravagant, just polished. The stylist tied my hair in a loose, elegant bun, leaving a few strands to frame my face. She smiled at me through the mirror. "You look like you're about to change someone's mind," she said playfully. I almost smiled back. "Not someone's mind," I murmured. "Maybe just their memory." That night, I sat on my bed, scrolling through old photos, birthdays, holidays, moments when my family and I had still laughed together. I could see how my smile had changed over time, becoming tighter, more cautious. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to fix it. Sometimes losing people isn't a tragedy, it's release. The morning of the wedding arrived like the calm before a storm. I woke before dawn, my heart steady. The world outside was painted in soft gold light, the kind that makes everything feel suspended between endings and beginnings. I slipped into the gown, the fabric hugging my body like quiet armor. When Daniel knocked on my door, I almost didn't recognize him. He wore a dark gray suit, simple but sharp, his hair neatly combed. "You look—" He paused, searching for words, like someone they'll regret overlooking. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I felt luminous, powerful in silence. We drove in his old silver car, the road stretching endlessly ahead. I expected my nerves to rise, but they didn't. Instead, there was a strange peace inside me, a surrender not to defeat, but to destiny. The kind that whispers, "Whatever happens, I've already won by showing up." As we neared the venue, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. "Please, Lucy, don't make things complicated today." I didn't reply. I simply turned off the phone and placed it in my bag. The closer we got, the louder the music became, faint through the car windows. I saw people in glittering gowns and tailored suits stepping out of luxury cars, laughing, posing for photos. For a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed my mind. What if I really didn't belong there? What if my presence would ruin everything? Daniel must have sensed my hesitation. He placed a hand over mine. "You're not crashing their world," he said softly. "You're reclaiming yours." When I stepped out of the car, the air shifted. Conversations faltered. People turned. The sun caught the sheen of my dress, scattering it into soft reflections. Whispers began, hushed, incredulous, like they were seeing a ghost. "Is that Lucy? She actually came? Who's the guy with her?" Each murmur fueled my resolve. I held Daniel's arm and walked forward, my chin high, every step deliberate. I wasn't there to seek approval or forgiveness. I was there to remind them that no matter how hard they tried to erase me, I existed. Amanda saw me before anyone else. Her face froze, part shock, part irritation, part fear. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other, the silence between us thick with everything unsaid. Then I smiled, a small, calm, devastating smile. "Congratulations," I said softly when I reached her. "You look beautiful." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "You weren't supposed to—" "I know," I interrupted gently. "But I'm here anyway." Behind her, our mother's face tightened and our father looked away. But I didn't let it sting. Not this time. I turned slightly, feeling the weight of every eye on me, and realized the truth. I didn't need their validation anymore. The act of standing there, uninvited yet unshaken, was victory enough. Later, as Daniel and I took our seats near the back, He leaned close and whispered, "You did it." "You showed up," I exhaled, slow and steady. "Yes," I said. And that's all I needed to do. In that moment, surrounded by people who once made me feel invisible, I understood the quiet power of presence. I didn't need revenge that screamed. I needed revenge that glowed, soft, steady, undeniable. And as the ceremony began, I caught Amanda stealing one more glance my way. Not with hate, but with something that looked like regret. That's when I knew. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying what they built. It's reminding them they never could erase what you are. The venue stood like a fairy tale castle carved out of glass and light. White roses climbed up marble pillars, chandeliers glittered like captured stars, and every inch of the hall screamed perfection. But to me, it all felt artificial, too polished, too staged, like beauty built to hide decay. As Daniel parked the car, I stared out the window, my reflection faintly visible against the gold glow spilling from the entrance. For a moment, I wondered if I truly belonged there, if I should have listened when Amanda told me not to come. But then I remembered her words, the calm cruelty of them, and the reason I'd chosen to show up anyway. The air was thick with the scent of roses and champagne as we stepped out. Daniel adjusted his tie, his quiet confidence grounding me. His hand brushed mine, a small, steady gesture that said, "You're not alone this time." I inhaled deeply, the night air cold against my skin, and began walking toward the grand doors. Each step felt heavier, yet more powerful. I could feel eyes turning before I even crossed the threshold. Curious glances first, then gasps, then murmurs that rippled through the crowd like a storm. "Is that Lucy? She actually came? Who's that with her?" Their words hung in the air, soft but sharp enough to cut. I held my head high, my sapphire gown catching the light like spilled ink. Daniel walked beside me, calm, unbothered, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, as though reminding me I belonged there as much as anyone else. I could sense the unease my presence caused, the way people shifted uncomfortably, pretending to smile but unable to look me in the eye. And then, at the far end of the hall, I saw her, Amanda. She stood in a circle of people, laughter spilling from her like it was rehearsed, the kind of laugh meant for attention. But when her eyes found mine, everything stopped. Her smile froze, her body stiffened, and for the briefest second her mask slipped. I saw the flicker of panic in her gaze, the one that comes when the ghost you buried walks into your perfect little world. I smiled, not arrogantly but peacefully, and approached her with deliberate grace. The music dimmed in my mind. All I could hear was the echo of my heels against the marble floor. When I reached her, I offered a small wrapped box, my fingers steady. "Congratulations, Amanda," I said softly. "It's just something I thought you'd like." Her eyes darted between me and the gift as though it might explode. Slowly, she unwrapped it. Inside was the locket our grandmother had given me before she passed. The same one Amanda had once tried to take, years ago, during another quiet betrayal. I watched as she blinked, her painted smile faltering for the first time that night. "Lucy, I can't," she began, but I cut her off with a calmness that scared even me. "It's yours," I said. "I just thought it might go better with your dress." The silence between us was suffocating. Then she nodded stiffly and mumbled a thank you, her voice brittle. Around us, I could feel the curiosity brewing, the guests whispering, confused by the tension they didn't understand. But I didn't care. I'd said what needed to be said without words. That locket wasn't a gift, it was a mirror. Daniel's presence beside me was magnetic. He didn't say much, but his silence spoke louder than any confrontation. His calm energy drew eyes, made people wonder who he was and why I was with him. He looked at me like I was worth being seen, and somehow, that made everyone else question why they'd ever thought I wasn't. When our eyes met, a small, reassuring smile passed between us, unspoken, steady, warm. The evening blurred into a whirl of laughter, clinking glasses, and polite conversations that felt like performances. Everywhere I turned, I caught the same expressions, smiles that never reached the eyes, pity disguised as politeness. My parents were there, of course. My mother wore the same silver dress she'd worn to Amanda's graduation. Her eyes avoided mine as if contact would burn her. My father, stoic as ever, stood by the bar, pretending to be engrossed in conversation. Neither approached me. Neither acknowledged that I had come. At one point, I caught my reflection in a window, the faint shimmer of my gown, Daniel's figure beside me, and I almost didn't recognize the woman looking back. She looked stronger, composed, untouchable. For a brief second, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not from them, but from their opinion of me. Dinner was announced, and we all moved to our tables. Daniel and I were seated near the back, an intentional placement, I was sure, but I didn't mind. From that distance, I could see everything. Amanda floated between tables, all smiles and laughter, occasionally glancing my way as though to check if I was still there. She couldn't ignore me anymore, and that was enough. Then came the moment that changed everything. The maid of honor, Amanda's childhood friend Claire, stood up to make her speech. She was tipsy, her words flowing with the smug confidence of someone who believed she could say anything and still be adored. She began with predictable lines about friendship and love, but then her tone shifted, and her eyes flickered in my direction. "Some people," she said, her smile twisting, "show up even when they're not wanted. But weddings are about forgiveness, aren't they?" The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. A few giggles, a few awkward glances, and the kind of collective discomfort that makes you wish the floor would open up and swallow you whole. My face burned. My throat tightened. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Every ounce of confidence I'd built crumbled under that wave of humiliation. I felt Daniel's hand on mine, warm, grounding, reminding me to breathe. He didn't squeeze too hard. He didn't whisper reassurances. He just stayed. That small gesture kept me from breaking. When Claire sat down, still grinning, I could see Amanda's half-hearted attempt to look embarrassed, but she didn't stop her. She didn't correct her. She let it happen. And that hurt more than the words themselves. Then, without warning, Daniel stood up. Calmly. Steadily. The murmur of conversation dimmed as people turned to look. His voice was soft, but it carried through the room like the echo of truth. "Forgiveness," he said, "is also about humility. The strongest people forgive silently, without needing to prove who was wrong." The room fell silent. Forks froze midair. Claire's smirk vanished. Amanda looked away first, her face pale. No one dared to speak, and then Daniel sat back down as if nothing had happened. I stared at him, stunned. My heart ached. Not from pain this time, but from gratitude so fierce it almost hurt. He didn't defend me with anger or outrage. He defended me with dignity. He reminded everyone what real strength looked like. The rest of the night moved slowly. Conversations became careful, hesitant. People avoided my table, unsure whether to apologize or pretend nothing had happened. I could feel the shift in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement that the balance had changed. For the first time that night, I didn't feel like the outcast. I felt like the story. Later, as the music played and couples danced under the chandeliers, Daniel offered me his hand. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's show them what grace looks like." We stepped onto the dance floor, the crowd parting instinctively. The music swelled, soft jazz, slow and timeless. His hand on my waist was steady, his gaze unwavering. Around us, whispers began again, but this time they carried a different tone. Not gossip, but awe. "You're incredible," he murmured as we moved. I smiled faintly. "No," I whispered back. "I just stopped being afraid." We danced through the song, through the tension, through the noise that had once defined me. When it ended, people clapped politely, unsure whether it was for the dance or for the quiet statement it made. I didn't care which. Both were true. As the night drew on, I felt exhaustion settle into my bones, not the tiredness of regret, but the calm after battle. I'd walked into the room that forgot me, and I hadn't begged to be remembered. I'd simply made them see me again, on my own terms. When we finally left, the cool night air wrapped around me like a sigh of relief. The music and laughter faded behind us, replaced by the hum of crickets and the quiet thrum of my heartbeat. Daniel opened the car door for me, but before I got in, I looked back at the glowing hall. I could still see Amanda's silhouette through the windows, her posture rigid, her smile forced. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance, and I saw it, the regret, the realization, the small crack in her perfect facade. I smiled softly, almost pitying her. Then I turned away. As we drove off into the night, Daniel reached over and took my hand. "You didn't need to prove anything," he said. "You already were enough." I looked out the window at the streaks of passing light and whispered, more to myself than to him. They told me not to show up. But I showed up as the person they never thought I'd become. And for the first time in years, that thought didn't ache. It healed. Morning came soft and gold, a forgiving light that slipped through the blinds and brushed my face like an apology for a storm already past. And for a long while I lay still, listening to the hush of the apartment and the faint buzz of the city waking up, half afraid that if I moved, the quiet would shatter and the old ache would flood back in. But it didn't. What returned instead was the memory of last night like a steady tide. The marble glow of the hall, the way whispers bent around my name and eventually softened, the cool air on my shoulders as Daniel and I left, his fingers interlacing with mine without fanfare, and the oddest sensation that I had reclaimed something more permanent than a seat at a table. I made tea and watched the steam rise. My phone faced down on the counter like a talisman I wasn't sure I should touch. But curiosity finally won, and I flipped it over to a constellation of notifications. Group tags I didn't belong to, strangers' comments and photographs already leaving the wedding to live 100 lives online. There we were in the center of a dozen frames, me in sapphire, chin lifted, Daniel beside me composed, and the captions told a story that did not belong to the old script. Mysterious couple steals a moment. Who is she? The girl they said wouldn't come came anyway. And I laughed, not cruelly, but with a kind of tender disbelief that the world had noticed the quiet that was mine. It felt almost indecent to enjoy it, almost childish. But I let myself feel the warmth anyway, because for once the light fell where I hadn't begged it to. I put the phone down when a knock sounded, 3 soft taps that were so familiar my heart knew before my mind. I opened the door to my mother standing there with a small bouquet, the kind you buy when you are not brave enough for grand gestures, her silver dress replaced by a cardigan and careful face, and the air between us was stitched with years we had chosen not to mend. She didn't ask to come in. She simply stepped across the threshold like a woman entering a chapel where she had forgotten the words to a prayer, and I let her, because refusing would be a new kind of violence. "Your father's parking the car," she said to the teapot, not to me, then added too quickly, "We saw the pictures." I nodded and poured her a cup she did not touch. "You looked happy," she said, the sentence built like a bridge barely reaching my side. I wanted to ask why it had taken 1,000 shared meals and 1 public evening for her to see my face clearly. But grief makes cowards of ordinary people, and I was tired of making war with the wind. I said, and let the truth sit between us without sharpening it into a weapon. Her eyes moved to the bouquet like a person asking something of an object. When she finally spoke, her voice was not the one she'd used at the wedding or the kitchen table years ago. It was softer, older, as if speaking across a long hallway. "We thought, after you argue with Amanda, that maybe space would heal it." I might have laughed once upon a time at the idea that distance knits wounds, but the older I grow, the more I believe people choose the remedy that costs them least. I was too tired to punish that small human error. "Space only widened what was already broken," I said, and my mother winced, because an honest sentence can be a mirror, and no one likes to see how they look when they turn away. She glanced at the bouquet again and then at me. "She shouldn't have let her friend say those things," she whispered, and the we of parents slid quietly into the she of a daughter, as if guilt could be outsourced like a chore. But I did not argue. I simply said, I know, and let compassion, not absolution, not yet, fill the silence where a ledger might have opened. The door clicked, and my father entered with the hesitance of a man who had practiced being stoic so long, he'd forgotten the language of warmth. He nodded at me once, at the floor twice, and sat down as if the chair might accuse him. We spoke of neutral things, the weather, the caterer, whether the coffee at the venue had been too bitter. It had. And over the plain beige of our conversation, something fragile was daring to color itself in. Not quite apology, not quite understanding, but the prelude to both. At last, my mother did what mothers do when they fear they have failed in ways that can't be measured. She fussed with the bouquet as if giving it a better home would grant her the courage for a harder sentence. Your sister is proud, she said, and then more quietly, and afraid of not being loved if she is not first. The sentence unlocked a small tenderness I had hidden from myself. I had always seen Amanda's hunger as greed, but in my mother's mouth it looked like a child who had spent years earning a hug. It didn't excuse the math they had done with my name, but it made the numbers less monstrous. I'm not trying to take anything from her, I said, surprising myself with how true it felt to say it out loud. I'm just refusing to give away what is mine, my voice, my presence, my right to be seen. My father's throat moved. He stared at a crack in the table like a man rehearsing contrition on a small stage, then said, as if sliding a coin across a counter, I should have told her to stop. And if the sentence was late, it was at least intact, and I pocketed it like currency I could use to buy a different ending. They didn't stay long. Apologies wear out their shoes when they are not used to walking, and I did not force them to parade. At the door, my mother touched my cheek just once, the way she had done when I was 7 and feverish, and the regression made something in me loosen. Anger is a heavy blanket, and I was tired of sleeping under it. You looked like yourself, she said at last. And I realized perhaps that was the thing that had unsettled them most, seeing me not as a reflection of their desire, but as a whole person is frightening. If you built your peace on a smaller version of someone you love. After they left, I stood in the quiet and let the tea go cold and felt, for the first time in a long time, that silence was not a punishment, but a gift. I didn't need to perform my worth for an empty room. Later that afternoon, as if the day had decided to braid all loose threads into something wearable, a message arrived from Amanda. No preface, no heart, just a link to a photo from last night. I braced for a barb and found instead 8 words I had not expected. The locket looked better on me because of you. It was not an apology. It was a clumsy gratitude in a dialect she had never learned to speak, and I could have been offended by its vanity. But I chose to read the line beneath it. When I gave her the thing she coveted without a fight, I had removed the currency she had used to measure love. I typed and erased 6 replies before choosing the one I could live with if she never answered. It was Grandma's way of keeping us both close. Her 3 dots appeared, blinked, vanished, and in that space, I decided our peace would not be a single sentence but a long road with soft ditches. Daniel knocked that evening with a paper bag of groceries and a smile that sat not on his mouth, but in the way he stood, easy, unhurried, as if time itself had learned to breathe around him. I figured we'd make dinner, he said, and the ordinary mercy of chopping onions beside someone who had once been a stranger felt holier than any speech from a pulpit. We cooked in the unshowy choreography of people who have chosen to listen, his hand finding the salt without asking, mine passing the pan before he reached for it, the sizzle like a low hymn. You were brave last night, he said, not making a statue of the moment, but acknowledging it the way you might lay a hand on a shoulder in passing. It didn't feel like bravery, I admitted. It felt like finally stopping a game I didn't agree to play. He nodded, and the acceptance in that small motion unlatched another truth I had carried for years, that my rage had only ever been a guard dog protecting a softer animal, self-respect, that needed kinder company to come out. We ate on the balcony while the city stitched pink to blue, and I told him about my parents' visit, about my sister's half-sentence, about the bouquet that had already begun to droop in the vase like a tired apology. And he listened the way he always had, letting my words take the size they needed without trying to make them fit his hands. When I finally ran out of sentences, the sky had gone the color of forgiveness. And he took my fingers in his and said the line that would become mine for the rest of my life. You don't have to be invited to your own worth. I had been waiting all my years for someone to move the furniture of my heart with such gentle certainty, and I felt the rooms open, sun sliding into corners I had forgotten to dust. He walked me back inside and we moved through small acts that together felt like a vow. Washing plates, laughing at a tomato that had died an honorable death in the pan, folding the bag to reuse. The ordinary making a cathedral around the extraordinary. The photos kept multiplying online over the next days. A cousin's friend wrote a caption about dignity. An aunt shared a picture of the dance and added 3 hearts. The maid of honor publicly posted something about learning from moments of misjudgment without naming me. And I discovered that being the subject of a story doesn't have to steal your name if you've already claimed it yourself. I went to work and poured coffee, and the woman from the flower shop down the street told me I looked taller. I wasn't, but perhaps some spines grow from the inside out when they are finally done bending. On the 3rd day, a small envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note in Amanda's careful script. I don't know how to say I'm sorry without sounding like I want forgiveness too quickly. But I am. I was afraid you would outshine me, and instead I dimmed us both. If you're willing, maybe we can start with something small. Coffee that isn't at a wedding. I sat very still and let the words find a home where bitterness used to sleep. I wasn't naive enough to confuse a note with transformation, but I had once promised myself that the revenge I wanted was not to make her hurt, but to make me whole. And wholeness sometimes requires the humility to accept a bridge even when it's built out of twigs. I wrote back that I would meet her at the cafe across from the park on Sunday, that she could bring nothing but an open throat and a willingness to sit in discomfort, and I sealed the envelope with a steadiness I had earned. That night on the balcony, the city slow and bright beneath us, I said aloud the heartbreak line that had lived in my chest since the group chat erased me, and the marble hall tried to erase me again. They tried to make me silent so they wouldn't have to hear themselves. It was the truest sentence I had. And saying it didn't reignite my anger. It cleared the last of its smoke. I turned to Daniel then, to the man who had not rescued me but reminded me I had never needed rescuing. And I realized the quiet I felt was not an absence, but a presence of a different kind. The sound of my life coming back to me without the static of begging to belong. Peaceful resolution does not look like a curtain falling. It looks like choosing to walk down the aisle of your own days without waiting for applause. Like forgiving without pretending the wound never existed. Like giving back a locket, not because you don't cherish it, but because you cherish yourself more. In the weeks that followed, my mother called twice with no agenda. My father sent a photo of a cracked table he was finally fixing. Amanda and I drank coffee and said the difficult things without trying to win. And sometimes we didn't speak at all. And it was still an improvement. I kept the sapphire dress in my closet not as a costume, but as an artifact of a night when my spine learned its true height. And on an ordinary Tuesday, walking to work with the sun in the generous mood it keeps for people who have decided to go on, I understood the moral I had been stumbling toward. Revenge that heals is simply the decision to live so fully that the space they cleared for your absence becomes a garden you tended without their permission. I will not pretend we became a perfect family or that forgiveness finished its work in a single season, but I can tell you this. I no longer ask doors to open that were built to keep me small. I build my own and invite in the ones who know how to sit with tenderness. In the end, the story they tried to write without me turned into a story I wrote with myself. And if they remember me now, it is not because I shouted, but because I showed up with a presence they could not ignore. And then, quietly, stubbornly, mercifully, I stayed.